apart and turned into their own individual what we call UV shells. And you'll also notice here on the side that my gun now has the checker pieces conveniently and effectively going across the entire grid. This is great news to hear because pretty much this would have taken us a while to do. This works effectively in some ways. Currently, the one problem I currently have with it is that it's not quite as effective. Essentially, you'll notice when let me go back into object mode here, and then let me go to UVs, and you'll notice that when I have my UVs here selected, my UVs are really spaced out all over the place, and on top of that I have certain UVs that I don't need. So let me just select one of my UVs here, and then I'm going to hold control down and hit right click and go to shell. And you notice here that on my shell I have these duplicates of this UV is pretty much just the right side of this whole thing, and then these UVs are pretty much just the left side of this whole thing. So let me quickly just I'm going to open up my hypershade once more, and I'm going to revert back to what we originally had. That way I can kind of see what my texture is underneath here. It's kind of discombobulating my UVs over here, making them obnoxious. So let me just go back into my blend, and then I'm going to pop open my attributes editor once more. I'm going to actually travel to the checker piece here. I'm going to change the color from being white to kind of a more manageable color that I can actually see through. So changing this to a red, and then I'm just going to hit accept, and then I'm actually going to change this one to a blue as well. Obviously my gun will not be this color, but this will allow us to actually notice how we're doing our UVs here. So once that's done, notice how my blend is updated also in the hypershade. Now that's permanently applied, and so any object that would have had that blend attached to it would have also updated now with that new texture. You'll notice though that what that ended up doing is changing my texture over here in the UV editor, which is perfect because in the UV editor you can change the color of these UVs and their lines in between them from white to some other color, but white's going to work in my case. So essentially, since I want more space on my screen here, despite the fact that it's large, it's not large enough apparently for what I'm trying to do. So I'm just going to minimize my attributes editor by clicking that little arrow. Alright, so now I have this section set up. Now I don't really need my gun to be seen quite as much as I do need my objects here on the right. You'll notice on the left side here, as I'm working through my workflow over here on the right, that these UVs are being selected and they're being altered. Now the thing that's important to know is that any changes you make to a UV inside of here does not actually change your faces that exist out here. The important thing to know is that when I use automatic projection, what it does is it gives me the correct size based off of these objects inside of the automatic projection, which you saw earlier, which was the 6 planes, one on top, bottom, right, left, forward, and back. So essentially now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be selecting these individual UVs, holding control down, going to the shell, and I'm just going to kind of move these over. And so you'll notice now that the UVs that I have selected are updating here on the side. And essentially what that is you got one thing that's important to know is you see that there's no texture over here in the first quadrant, the third quadrant, and the fourth quadrant. The reason behind that is because only the second quadrant, the positive values of 0 to 1, both in the U and the V, are the only places that get used. No negative spaces are used here. So if I move my object over here, I don't actually gain anything, and it won't be technically on the UV texture map. The reason why, though, you can see that this is updating as I move it across is because essentially this texture here is replicated infinite amount of times in all directions. So that's why as I'm moving this, you can see how the checkers are moving along the corners here. I'm just going to move this off to the side. Essentially this is a UV shell right here, and you'll notice that it's this set of green dots. You'll also notice though that if I end up selecting certain UVs, such as, well, we'll go with, let's try these ones here. You notice that as I selected those, let me see if I can find them over here. Oh, there they are. Essentially those UVs are actually attached to the same faces that some of these other faces are attached to. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is going through and reattaching, or what we call sewing, the UVs back together. It's a long, obnoxious process. Unfortunately, it has to be done, but it does make things more efficient. And the reason why I do it before I go into ZBrush is because inside of ZBrush I could just do auto